My guests today are Lawrence Brewer, the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. government at the National Archives and Records Administration, and Lisa Harlampus, the Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach, also at NARA. Lawrence, Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Glad to be here.
Same here.
So let's start with the fact neither of you are CIOs, but we are doing an Ask the CIO, but that's okay because we're going to talk a lot about technology and we're going to talk a lot about things that chief information officers and others should know about. First of all, we're going to start with this idea of electronic records management. We're going to look back to the 2019 memo from the Office of Management and Budget, who says the goal is to transition agencies' business processes and records keeping to a fully electronic environment. And to that end, NARA wants to get rid of accepting those paper records by December 31st, 2022. The goal is to reduce the burden on agencies and on citizens and to reduce costs. So Lisa, Lawrence, we've got plenty to talk about. Let's just start with that first deadline. There's a big electronic records mandate. How are agencies currently working toward it? And talk a little bit about those upcoming deadlines. Lawrence, why don't you kick us off?
So thank you again for having us here. We're really excited to talk about the mandates and the targets and the goals that we've been working on with federal agencies. One thing to keep in mind is we've really been working on this with agencies since 2011 and the presidential memorandum that came out on managing electronic records. And then since then, we've had a big directive in 2012 which talked about reforming record keeping and transitioning to fully electronic government. And then there's been other activities such as government reform plans through this administration, and that brings us up to date to the directive that we are currently working on now with agencies, M1921. So it's not revolutionary. We have been building upon the work that we have been doing since 2011 with federal agencies and just continuing this process of transitioning to fully electronic government, which we have seen, especially as we're working now in COVID-19 and working through this pandemic, is something that's really important to make sure that we are creating and managing electronic records to promote efficiency and effectiveness of government through our services to the public.
And Lawrence, you and I probably have talked over the years. I'd even go back to the Electronic Records Archive, the ERA project, not the original ERA project, of course, but the ERA from the early 2000s as a government initiative. And really that was when I remember the government really taking this much more seriously. And ERA, I know, plays a role in this broader effort. So as you said, it's not revolutionary, it's been building up to it. So how are we doing from your perspective as the government's chief records officer?
So we collect data from agencies every year through our annual reporting, and it's very important that we not only do that, but we do a lot with oversight and doing inspections with agencies, and we're always collecting data. And I think what we're hearing from agencies is that they are making progress. And I think what we are hearing is sort of the common trends and themes and concerns is that, obviously, and I think most people would assume that the key issue that we are struggling with as a government is around resources, both financial and human. So, we have to continue to work on how we're going to address that, working with CIOs and chief data officers, because what we really want to do is look for ways that we can leverage existing systems, existing solutions, and then trying to figure out where we can identify specific solutions that will create enterprise-wide solutions for records management, either using capabilities that we have in-house with Microsoft Office 365, or using what we have done with email and the capstone approach in essentially leveraging the live email systems and then building in some record-keeping functionality to that. So, there's a lot that we have done working with agencies to make progress. And there's still a lot more that needs to be done, and we're working with other organizations and agencies to see where we can issue more guidance, work on policies, and try and continue to move things forward with agencies.
Lisa, as the director of the Records Management Policy and Outreach, you're probably working very closely with the different agencies as they kind of move down this path towards the December 2022 deadline. Give me a sense of what you see at maybe the next level down from Lawrence.
Well, thank you for that. So I'll say I'm the next level down, but I like to always wind up and start by going a little bit higher. We're the National Archives and Records Administration. So the National Archives part of our mission is to preserve historically valuable records. And we don't care what format they were on. That's always been part of the agency mission. We have records on parchment. We have records on fax paper, which we've preserved very carefully, records on all kinds of different maps and charts. And when records are electronic, that's where we get that connection between records management and information management, between the chief records officer and the chief information officer. So that's where I would say our level down is where we're working with agencies to look for those ways to work together and leverage the different roles and responsibilities. Because a lot of time from where we see where we're working with agencies on a policy and implementation, it's a lot of numbers questions. How many numbers of systems do we have? What kind of information is generated? How long can I keep it? You know, there's a lot of things you have to do in information governance to protect information, to make sure it's secure, to make sure it's authentic and reliable and accessible over time. And one of the easiest things to do is just to say, well, we don't need this anymore. We can stop. We can delete information and then focus our resources on what we need. And getting people to delete electronic information according to a records schedule and records management, it's really hard. So having the records profession and the National Archives with the work we do on schedule and retention, giving agencies guidance to say this record can be kept for 7 years and then deleted. But this version, this series, or this part of that system, that's the historical valuable stuff that we think is gonna have long-term interest to the public, to the research community. That's what we want. And building systems and getting the requirements so that information can be managed over time. That's, I guess, where our level down is, the challenges we face and how we try to work with the IT community.
Lisa, one thing occurs to me as you kind of talked a little bit about the different challenges the agencies face is, for years, agencies, from NARA's perspective, you probably went to the CIO's office. There's somebody who was in charge of records management. There's a chief records officer, maybe there still is, but now we have the chief data officer. And I know everyone loves to talk about, well, information and data are not necessarily the same thing, but a lot of times when it comes to records and data, that there's this intersection. Are you seeing that as you go to have meetings with agencies, the CDO is showing up more and more, or are you still working with that side of the fence of records and chief information officer, or what?
I feel like every year that I've been in this profession, I add one more portfolio of an agency. You know, back in the paper days, we'd say, always you've got to talk to legal and records. And then it was talk to legal, records, and IT. Then it was talk to legal, records, IT, information governance, and now just throw the data officers on there as well. So yes, the chief data officer role, as they look on how to use and reuse and protect and leverage the data that an agency has, is very, very similar to the questions that records managers have been asking. I feel that between information management, e-discovery, data management, there's a foundation that we all share. And that's the part that I have been working and trying to sort of advocate and say we can actually save time, save effort, and get the better picture. From our perspective in records management, it's fascinating to go into agencies and talk with, or perform that work. And the first question is, well, what records do you have? That's a hard question to answer because technology is always evolving. Mission priorities change. And as I like to use in both work and home life, incremental improvements. I can always get better at doing things, from loading the dishwasher to managing electronic records, right? We can always get better. And as you get better and better, that changes the tools, the techniques, the formats, how we're working. So if those fields all have the same question to start off with, what do we have? What information are we trying to manage? What data sets do we have? That's where I see the information governance spheres relating. And so you can say, well, I'm a records officer. I've been doing records and inventories and file plans, and I know how information flows from a records perspective. How can we learn from what the chief data officers and the data community knows? Well, I can tell you how the data works. And then it gets back to that same question that we're always asking. What's the value? How can I share it? How can I leverage it? And how long do I keep it? So yes, we are seeing chief data officers having that, or chief data managers. I think a lot of agencies are still working and developing and maturing their data programs, establishing the position, sort of figuring out how to fill it and where it fits in their information governance. And we're seeing conversations starting, but we haven't yet seen any trends of organizational realignment, where sort of like people are put in same organizational spheres. So we're watching and sort of monitoring the space to see how records, information, and data gets institutionalized, or does it still stay in its own separate silos, and then we work, you know, in as always in collaborative environments to share what we know.
Lawrence, we just have about 30 seconds before break, but I just want to bring you into this because at your level, the next level up, if you will, are you also having different or conversations with federal executives, again, whether it's CIOs or deputy secretaries or the like?
Yeah, so it's a good point that we really do need to touch on, and we continue to talk with agencies about. It's more a matter of routine when I'm meeting with senior officials at other agencies that we're talking about information governance and how records management or the records officer in an agency or the senior agency official for records management needs to be embedded into that information governance framework and ensure that these discussions, policies, training, everything is directed from the top down throughout the organization. Now, what that doesn't get to, and I know we're limited on time because we could spend a whole lot of time about the skills needed within the agencies for the people who are doing records management at an operational level. Whereas in the past, they were focused on managing paper records, we really need them to have the skill sets to be able to work with electronic records and be successful doing that, supporting the executives who are managing it at a more strategic level. And that's the connection that we are working with agencies on, trying to bridge the gap and speaking for the records managers, the records liaison officers who are doing the work for records management and connecting that to the higher level executives who have to direct it from a strategic perspective.
Well, Lawrence, I think we probably will talk about that skill set need, but we're going to take a break first. When we come back, that's something maybe we can touch upon. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to a special edition of Ask the CIO, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on Federal News Network.